And as promised, today we are interviewing library trustee and town meeting member Michael Burstein from Precinct 12. Now, we're not going to talk much about the libraries today, although Mike's going to say what Mike's going to say. Uh, what we're really interested in is a recap of town meeting. And we're not going to do every article, but we're going to sort of pick and choose some ones that we thought were interesting and get kind of the lowdown from Michael Burstein, who's a longtime town meeting member, pays close attention, really knows what's up. So Michael, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Delighted that you could join us, and I hope you're doing well.
Well, thank you, Tommy, and thank you for asking me to be on your show. I think I'm doing as well as anybody can during this really odd time of the pandemic. It's a lot of people are doing a lot worse than I am right now, so I have to say that I'm very grateful for the things that I do have right now. But I'm hoping that we're going to start seeing light at the end of the tunnel.
And speaking of light, happy first day of Hanukkah, December
Yes.
10th.
Well. First night of Hanukkah. Yes. Hanukkah begins tonight, and it's the first candle. Yeah, and then tomorrow's the first day, and it's 8 days. And I would want to, and actually, I'd like to wish Happy Hanukkah to all of the people who are watching this who celebrate and observe Hanukkah. And if that's not your holiday, I hope you have a happy holiday, whatever it is that you are going to be observing at this time.
Thank you, Michael. Let's get into it. Before we talk about specific warrant articles, I want to remind viewers that this was the second town meeting where we did it fully virtually because of COVID. That required state legislation. We got it passed, and it was certainly a different experience. What are some of the things that you liked better or liked less about virtual as opposed to all of us meeting at the high school auditorium?
Well, first of all, let me point out that I've been a town meeting member since the year 2001. So I've been in town meeting for almost 20 years now. I've seen a lot, I've experienced a lot. It feels kind of strange to me because I still remember myself as the new guy or one of the many new people. And I've discovered that I'm now sort of more of the old guard. It's been an interesting experience because normally what town meeting does is all of the town meeting members from all over town gather at the high school. We meet in the auditorium and we're all there in person. We're sitting with each other. We can see each other. We interact with each other. I will admit there are some side conversations that not necessarily should happen, but there are also some, that we'll talk about what's going on in the warrant articles. And then after it's over, we all go home and then we come back each and every night. So I did miss that sort of thing. There's a something I think that is lacking when you're not in person with everybody. On the other hand, I have to say that meeting remotely had some major advantages other than avoiding COVID. I didn't have to schlep down to the high school and I didn't have to schlep back afterwards. I basically was able to turn on my computer, log in on Zoom. I feel that, participation was very active, maybe even more active in some ways. And it's nice to be able to say, okay, when town meeting ends each night around 10:30, we hope that instead of having to get home and then take some time there, that I am home. I can then just shut down my computer and take care of what has to happen next. So, there are advantages and disadvantages to both. That said, I'm hoping that we're going to be able to continue with remote town meeting for a while until we really know we're past this pandemic. That's going to take some time. And I keep thinking that there are some advantages to the remote participation that I think might help. We've been discussing over the past few years, some of us in town meeting, the question of people who have young children and how they can participate, people who maybe, have some sort of disability that makes it harder for them to get to the auditorium. So it would be nice if the State House could figure out a way to allow our town meetings to have some sort of remote participation. But I know that's not something, for right now. That's something that we may, we'll probably have to think about in the future.
Yeah, and it is part of the discussion. I will tell viewers that virtual town meeting is permitted. 100% virtual town meeting is permitted so long as we are under a COVID state of emergency. And in fact, I expect I will be working on a bill very soon, once we iron out a few details about making sure that, if the governor ceases the state of emergency 2 nights before town meeting is supposed to begin by state law, we have to meet in person. And just because we don't have a state of emergency doesn't necessarily mean all 240 town meeting members are ready to be meeting in person. And so it might make sense to extend this virtual town meeting, not just when we're under the state of emergency, but as you alluded to, Mike, a little bit longer, so that we can be sure everyone, from a COVID perspective, uh, feels comfortable meeting together. And we don't frankly know just when that's going to be yet. But let's talk a little bit about the articles themselves. I want to start with one that is going to impact folks in town, in that they will have to be thinking about how they're going to vote this coming May. And that is Warrant Article 12, which was the Community Preservation Act. I'd love for you to give us a quick rundown of what the CPA is and what town meeting did, and then we can maybe go backward and think through the history of it a little bit.
Well, I hope I have my facts right. So please forgive me if I get this a little bit wrong. The CPA was a law that was passed like all the way back, I think, in 2000, 2001, to basically allow towns to build up a little more money and get some money from the state to help with things like rebuilding, renovating parks, other parts of the town, I think some of the buildings. And it basically required a small surcharge that would be paid by people in the town. And that would end up, I believe there was going to be state money that goes attached to that. And then any town or municipality that signed up for this was going to be able to then tap into this extra pot of funds to help with things, again, like parks in the town. And I'm going to go into the history a little bit because I was actually there back in, I think it was 2000 and either 2 or 3 in 2006. Brookline Town Meeting tried to pass the CPA. It may interest your viewers to know that one of the main proponents of the CPA at the time was Jay Gonzalez, who some of your viewers may remember was the Democratic nominee for governor in our last governor election. Jay used to live in Brookline, was actually very actively involved in our town meeting. And he really tried to get Brookline to sign under the CPA. But about 20 years ago, town meeting voted it down. I know that a lot of people in town meeting at the time were concerned about the extra surcharge. This is actually kind of amusing. Those of us who are in support of the CPA at the time referred to the extra amount of money we'd have to pay, I think, on real estate taxes. I think I'm trying to remember where it is. Yeah, we called it, a surcharge. That's what it was being called. The people who were opposed to it called it a tax. And so the local media, it was really the Brookline Tab at the time, basically started referring to it as a surtax, which I don't know if that word existed yet before. But it was a very interesting debate all that long ago. And I found it interesting that I don't remember how it came back up in this year's town meeting, but it came back, and this time Brookline voted in favor of it. Now, one issue that I will point out is that the more municipalities that sign up for it, the less you can actually take out of the pot of money. So when we were trying to get it passed back in the early part of the 21st century, had we managed to, we probably would have gotten more of a share of it. Now we're going to be sharing with many more towns and municipalities that have already signed up for it. That said, I think that it's really good that it did pass, and I'm hoping that it will be of benefit to the town. But as you say, I think the town still has to vote on it. Town meeting basically
That's right. So
voted to send it to the townspeople.
the CPA funds 3 categories of things, right? Affordable housing, parks, open space, recreation, and community historic preservation. And each community has to spend a minimum of 10% in each of those 3 categories, and then the other 70% can divide up any way they want between the categories. And the town's contribution comes from the surtax, as you called it, on the property tax, and the state contribution comes from revenue that comes from deed transfer fees that everybody pays, whether or not you're in the CPA. And Michael, you're right. Now that many more communities are participating, there's less of a share or a partnership from the state, although in years where the budget has been robust, the state has actually kicked in extra CPA money, recognizing that it hasn't put in as much. And you're right, now it goes to the voters. in our May election who, a simple majority, if they want to pay more to then get those benefits for the town, then they'll vote yes. And if opposed, they'll vote no. Who was against the CPA in town meeting? Was there anybody against it?
You mean this year? Sorry?
Yeah, this year.
This year. I don't remember if there was an actual, um, what's the word? Organized opposition to it. I'd have to go check the vote. I honestly have to admit I don't have I don't have every final vote. We had 40 warrant articles this session. I don't remember which votes were
Spread over a couple of weeks.
Yeah, spread
right?
over 6 nights, which is a tie for the longest town meeting we ever had. I remember one other town meeting in the past 20 years that went for 6 nights. I mean, I think the CPA, if my memory serves me correctly, I think we were overwhelmingly in favor of it. But I will say, I mean, 20 years ago, there was a more organized opposition to certain things like this. I mean, basically in town meeting, like I think in all government, you've got, there are many things that you want to spend your money on, but you have to always make priorities, make decisions. I think, when I first joined town meeting in 2001, I got a real good and quick lesson in what governing is. Because for a lot of people, they look at our government and they think, oh, it's about this issue and that issue. And what it really boils down to is governing is figuring out where you're going to get the money from and what you're going to spend the money on. And that's really the big thing. Are you going to, are you going to put an extra surcharge, not surtax, I would say surcharge on the real estate taxes? And then are you going to use that money to fund affordable housing and parks and recreation? And you can tell from my memories that the parks and open space was really the big thing for me with the CPA. Brookline is an urban town, and most of us who live here, I think, don't really have large backyards. If I remember correctly, even all the numbers, I think the town still is about 60% renter and 40% owner occupied. If those are the numbers I remember from a few years ago, and I think it's vitally important that we have the parks and open space that we have. So that was where I was, why I've always been in favor of the CPA. I hope that the people who vote on it in May are going to see things the same way, in the way that town meeting did, and will vote in favor.
Well, we will certainly find out. Speaking of voting, I want to pivot actually to warrant Article 18, which was about ranked choice voting. Now, recall, this was a resolution, so it doesn't mandate that the town do anything, in fact. And of course, we had a ranked choice ballot question on the ballot in November, a different ranked choice question. The ranked choice question in November was for elections at the state level that are not president and not county, but state rep, state senator, U.S. Congress, that sort of thing. Failed statewide, but overwhelmingly was supported by Brookline. And so this warrant Article 18, was also about ranked choice voting. Tell us how that one went down.
Well, first of all, I just want to tell you that ranked choice voting, the state initiative, was one I was in favor of. I was disappointed to see it fail. And in Brookline, however, which had been very much in favor of the state initiative ranked choice voting, our resolution succeeded very well on ranked choice voting here in Brookline. There was a debate, there was some argument, because there are people who feel that ranked choice voting might be confusing, might be more expensive, might be more difficult, but there are actually already other municipalities in New England that use a form of ranked choice voting for certain elections. Cambridge uses it to elect their city councilors, for example. And in my history perspective, there are a few things I think about ranked choice voting. First of all, one thing that your viewers may not be aware of is that I'm actually an award-winning science fiction writer, and there is a major award in science fiction that's been given for years called the Hugo Award, and the Hugo Award actually uses a preferential ballot system, sometimes called the Australian ballot because Australia used it, which is basically ranked choice voting. So I've had familiarity with years for taking a ballot and saying, this is my number 1 choice. If that one gets knocked off, here's my number 2 choice. If that gets knocked off, here's my number 3 choice. And I see ranked choice voting as something that I hope, I mean, as you say, a resolution is not something that we're required to do, but the resolution says that we're going to investigate it. We're going to look into getting voting machines that will allow for it. We're going to look into possibly implementing it. I think it would be a good idea because what we have now in Brookline is what's called a plurality at large system, and it encourages bullet voting. And to give an example, I actually gave at town meeting years ago. I'm not sure how many of your viewers remember this. There was a school committee race where one candidate had chosen not to run for re-election. So you had Judy Myers and Ira Chan were the two incumbents. There was a third open seat, and Barbara Scott and Elizabeth Childs both ran. And a lot of people supported either Barbara or Elizabeth. There were a lot of people that were behind one or the other of these two candidates. And in the end, you had a lot of bullet voting. A lot of people basically assumed, well, of course, both incumbents are going to get back into the school committee. And so a lot of people just cast a vote, one vote either for Barbara or one for Elizabeth. Well, what happened was that Ira Chan, who at the time I think was the only non-white member of the school committee, lost his seat. And after that happened, I've heard a lot of voters who had bullet voted either Barbara or Elizabeth say, oh, that's not what I meant to happen. And all I could think of was, well, that might have not been what you meant to happen, but it is what happened. With a ranked choice voting system, so people could have easily ranked everybody, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you would, the advantages of it really are that if your choice is not there, your vote will still count. And on the state level, this is an advantage that I think is really good. Let's say you've got, let's call them the red party, the blue party, and the green party. And let's say that you really prefer the green candidate, but your next choice would be the blue candidate. Right now, if you vote for the green candidate and the green candidate gets 1% of the vote, you lose. But if you can rank your choices, you can rank 1 green, 2 blue, 3 red. And if the green candidate loses, your vote goes to the blue candidate. And I actually remember teaching this years ago. Do you remember the presidential election of the year 2000? Do you remember that one?
I do. I do.
So after that election, or I should say after the vote, but before we had the result, I was a teacher at the time and I was teaching a math class, a geometry class. My students were fascinated about what was going on, and I decided to teach them a whole lesson on voting. And I looked back to I think it's the 1998 governor's race in Minnesota that Jesse Ventura won. And I said to my students, Jesse Ventura got 40% of the vote, the Democrat got about 30, the Republican got about 30%. Who should win? And all my students say, well, Jesse Ventura, he got the most votes. And then I said, okay, but 60% of the people voted for someone else. Are you sure he should have won? And that was when the light went off in their heads and they realized that our voting system may not necessarily give you the best result. And that's when I said, if people who wanted Jesse Ventura as their first choice could have voted 1 for him and 2 for either the Democrat or Republican, and then somebody who would be a choice of the majority of the people might have ended up winning.
Now, in November 2000, I was living in Ireland. And so rather than teach folks about ranked choice voting, I taught folks about the electoral college system, one barroom full at a time, touring Dublin and explaining this over pints. Full disclosure, I co-sponsored the state legislation when it was a bill in the state house. But I will not comment on RCV locally, because if it is to become Brookline's policy, it will require a home rule petition, which will require action by the state legislature. And so if that's what the town decides that it wants, I will work hard to pursue it. And if it doesn't, then I will not. So I sort of try to stay out of it until that decision is made. Speaking though of voting, let's talk about the town clerk. So we had warrant articles 19 and 20 as a package, and they both related to the details of changing the town clerk position from elected to appointed by the select board. And this change would also require that the voters make their opinion known in the May town meeting. So May town meeting voters are going to have a lot to do because, in fact, this passed. So maybe you can run through a little bit of the debate, what folks pro and con said about it. This was a much livelier debate, I think, than many in town meeting, and an interesting one. So what did you hear? What did you think?
Well, the interesting thing about this one, the town clerk vote, is that it didn't come in a vacuum. We are sadly dealing with a situation right now where our longtime town clerk, Pat Ward, is indisposed, hasn't really been able to do his job for a while. And so in the middle of all this, this warrant article was proposed to change town clerk from an appointed to an elected office. I'll also point out that next May, when the town votes and these other things, we're also going to be voting for town clerk. So, it would be interesting if we vote for town clerk and at the same time vote to change what the position is like. But you had a very interesting debate here because on the one hand, one issue you had here is the question of what the town clerk's office is like. Is it a political office or is it more administrative? And a lot of the people who wanted to go for an appointed town clerk viewed this as a chance to actually create, have a position where you could get somebody who is not a registered voter in the town of Brookline, but someone could apply for the job anywhere in the area, who's got the skills and ability to do a town clerk job. And that's one of the things that I think, even Pat Ward actually sent a letter to town meeting encouraging us to change this to an appointed position. Because the problem with an elected town clerk is that if you're going to have elections, you want to have, you're not just voting for this person's going to represent me. It's like if my state rep is a complete dingling, but I like the way he votes. I'm not talking about you, of course, but if you like the way he votes, that's all I really care about to a certain extent is will he vote the way I care about on the issues. Not entirely. You want your representatives to be intelligent and people who work hard. But town clerk to a lot of people is really just a position that involves, running that office. On the flip side, though, a lot of people felt that it was not really a good idea to take any choice away from the voters. And it's ironic because you're basically putting in front of the voters a chance to take a choice away from them. A lot of people still see the town clerk as having a political aspect to it. The town clerk is required to provide those of us who run for office all the time with various information. The town clerk takes our campaign finance reports and makes them available to people. And so there are a lot of people who, were concerned from that side. I will admit that my own concern about the town clerk race on these is that I voted against changing it from elected to appointed. I understood the arguments for an appointed town clerk very well, but I really felt that taking it away from the voters, even if the voters are doing it themselves, I felt any step that takes a little power away from the voters, I was concerned about, especially in our current political climate. But town meeting disagreed with me for the most part. Town meeting would like the voters of the town to have a chance to decide, do we want to have an appointed town clerk? So we are going to have a very interesting election in May. We're going to have to vote on ranked choice voting. We're going to have to vote on the CPA.
We won't be voting on ranked choice voting in
right.
May.
Sorry.
That's just a resolution. But CPA,
CPA,
town clerk.
whether we want to have an appointed town clerk, we're voting for the town clerk. And we're also we already voted on acquiring the property that used to be that college. So,
but we will have the moderator election. We will have 2 select board members up. No question, it's going to be a busy election season. We've only got a couple of minutes left, and I really do want to ask you about warrant articles 22 and 23. I know you were involved in them. And this has been an issue that's been important to you. So I want to give you a minute to tell us about 22 and 23 and what that was all about.
Articles 22 and 23 were about eliminating gendered language from the town bylaws and zoning bylaws. The idea was to get rid of referring to human beings as simply as he, or even the phrase he or she, and either trying to eliminate that entirely or replace it with the word they. I have found this to be something very important. 3 years ago, I proposed the warrant article to change the phrase Board of Selectmen to Board of Select Women. I wasn't expecting us to get there, But I was trying to make a point about how, the minority of elected officials in Massachusetts are women, and we really need to figure out a way to increase women's representation in our elected positions. The warrant article back then, we ended up with a different one. We ended up going with, the gender neutral select board, which of course really makes more sense. We're living in a world now where we're acknowledging more the diversity of the people who live around us. A lot of people think we're living in a world now where there are more trans people and there are more people, or there are people who are deciding they're non-binary, that they don't fit into any gender. And it's like, well, why are we letting them do this? It was never like that before. And I'm sorry, no, it was like that before, but a lot of these people didn't feel like they could be their authentic selves. And it's important for everybody to be able to see themselves represented in politics, in town government, in life, in the world around us, on television, in books. Having town bylaws that require us to think of everybody as he or she. For a long time it was just he, and everybody's like, well, he also means women. And of course, we know how that turned out. People, didn't see women when they were thinking of scientists or leaders, or like presidents. And now we have this chance to say, no matter who you are, how you feel, um, our bylaws, it's a small step, but our bylaws acknowledge that there are people across the gender spectrum. And I do want to point out that I actually signed on to sponsoring this warrant article a little late. It was being put together by town meeting members Hadassah Margolis and Neil Gordon, along with a Brookline High School student, Catherine O'Connor. And they very graciously, when I found out they were doing this, allowed me to join them as a co-sponsor. Because as you said, Tommy, this is an issue that is very close to my heart. I feel I have met, I used to be a teacher, and I've had former students who have come out in many different ways. I have friends who have come out, some of whom, it's maybe a little easier to come out as gay or lesbian, but it's still incredibly difficult to say, well, I was assigned male at birth, but I'm now a woman. I want people to think of me that way. Or somebody who was assigned female at birth who doesn't feel comfortable being called she anymore and wants to be known as they. And I think it's vital that we acknowledge everybody in any way that we can.
Well, and I'll say that we, the town meeting, overwhelmingly agreed. If I recall, both votes were unanimous, which was refreshing. We don't get a ton of unanimous votes over meaningful changes. And this, of course, is a meaningful change in the way that we put forward our bylaws. All right, this is part of our town's values. And we were clear here. Michael, I'm thrilled that you were able to join me on Brookline Interactive Group today. And again, I wish you and your family a wonderful holiday. Michael Burstein, 20-year town meeting member, library trustee, Hugo Award winner, great guy who lives down the street.
Hugo Award nominee, never won.
Well, not yet.
We'll work on it.
Soon, one day. Keep writing. You'll get there. I believe in you. Michael, thank you so much for coming on the show, and you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. You too.